It's kind of a unique concept, isn't it? Turning an inherently social genre into a more private experience. And while .hack GU Volume 1 doesn't really go all in to recreating the MMO experience in a single-player JRPG, it's interesting to see what they adapted and how they did it. Welcome back to Best RPG Ever, where I subjectively review every RPG I play and objectively rank them against each other. Subjectively. A few quick things before we get into it. I'll talk about spoilers for a little bit partway through the story section. I'll give you plenty of heads up and a time code to skip to if you don't want to hear it. And secondly, I'm not trying to be too objective with this series. Objective is boring. We're just cruising in the vibes mobile and talking about how this game resonated with me. So try not to be too upset if I happen to say this is the worst game ever made. It'd only be the worst game ever made, in my opinion. Okay? Okay. We'll talk about the gameplay first. Man, it just doesn't do it for me. Combat isn't engaging in any way. Literally the only normal attacks you have are mashing A for quick attacks and holding A for a charge attack. That's it. Not even some simple Dynasty Warrior-esque combos, just the same attack string every time. There's a guard you can use to block when an enemy attacks. I guess that adds some strategy. Oh, I kinda do like the Rengeki system. So in addition to your normal attacks, you have skills. If you wail on an enemy long enough, eventually they'll enter a special state where you can use one of your skills on them and do more damage. But where that gets interesting is during the player versus player battles. If you see an enemy charging up their skill, you can use your skill on them first to get a counter for big damage. And you have to be careful about when you throw yours out too, because they can counter you as well. It adds a little bit of depth to a super simplistic combat system. I enjoyed kinda feeling out enemies and waiting for an opening. That's the only positive I can say about the combat. Even if it is fun to hit those, just the raw feel of doing normal attacks is nothing. The feedback from the animations and the audio does not do it justice. With some hit stop or better sound effects, I bet it'd feel a lot more satisfying. And maybe I'd forgive that if you had a ton of weapons, but as it is, you only have access to 2 in Volume 1. Maybe that changes in later volumes, I don't know. We'll talk about the later volumes in one of the other sections, I don't want to dwell on that right now. In this game at least, in the 16 hours it took me to beat it, I got really tired of seeing these dual blades and this greatsword. It feels like there's a whole world of mechanics I didn't even have to dive into. Weapon upgrading, weapon imbuing, or whatever it's called, grinding. Oh my god, this game does take place in an MMO, so of course they had to include some form of grinding. I can't imagine replaying one of these boring dungeons like 5 times to get a better weapon. I never even felt like the weapon the game gave me was underpowered. If anything, I felt overpowered. I think I might have lost 1 or 2 fights throughout the whole game. Even at the end, during the battles where the stakes are super high, I was not worried about dying. The game being so easy kinda deflated the story's impact for me. I don't know, I kinda don't want to talk about it anymore. It's not even super awful or offensive. It's completely inoffensive. That's the problem. Plus you can just cruise on by without engaging with a lot of the side systems. It's whatever. Next up is the pacing. This is something I find under-discussed when it comes to RPGs. These games can be long, so they have to pace out things well as to not bore the player. I weirdly liked the pacing of this game. Guess I'll elaborate on the volume thing now because it's kinda relevant. Think of these as more like parts to one full game, rather than a trilogy of games. I haven't played volumes 2 or 3, so maybe that's a bad assumption on my part, but that's the vibe I got playing this game. It feels like this is season 1 of a TV show. The first episode happens and the main character has some defining moment. A big bad is set up for later seasons to elaborate on. Friends are met that you'll no doubt keep throughout the journey, you get the idea. This game specifically feels like the tournament arc of a show. I always liked those types of arcs, so I kinda dug the structure that gave the plot here. You always had something super clear to work towards, it keeps the game focused. Something that did kinda get to me personally is the online stuff in the game. Outside of the game within a game, you can browse some news sites and forums. After big plot happenings, these sites will update with new content, both relevant to what just happened, as well as write-ups about random things in the world. News about how people are getting too sucked into their VR headsets, or a forum post about meal prep. It could be anything, really. At first, I liked reading through all these because I hadn't seen anything like this before. It felt like they were really making the most out of the MMO concept, and even going above and beyond by having you interact with the computer outside of the MMO. But as the game went on, I was less and less likely to read every new post that popped up. After a big plot reveal, I was excited to get back into the swing of things, figure out what we needed to do next, and start working towards that, you know? But when I went back to the operating system, there'd be like 10 new forum threads and 5 new news stories, and I just didn't want to bother. I will fully acknowledge that this is a personal preference thing. Maybe you'll appreciate a quiet little break from the plot to read all those. But me personally, I kinda lost interest in doing that as I got further into the game. Not a huge knock against the pacing, as it's something you could completely ignore, but it's something I thought I should mention. The plot. To give a brief rundown of the plot before getting into spoilers, apparently some guy is running amok throughout this game, exploiting a bug or something. He's attacking players and it's somehow affecting them in the real world, so your goal is to figure out how he's doing this and stop him. I'm kinda conflicted on that. On one hand, I feel like that's kind of a cool premise. Everyone's seen a bug before in a game. People know the intended behavior of games, and them being able to physically affect the person playing just doesn't make any sense, so you're kinda interested to see how that works. But on the other hand, I kinda just can't bring myself to care about it. This is more of a big picture complaint, but I feel like the game didn't do enough to bring me into this world, to get me invested in this conflict and truly want to solve it. Thinking back to Xenoblade Chronicles, the only other game I've covered in this series, I was truly motivated to stop Metalface. There's even some similar motivations going on in this game, but for whatever reason, it didn't sink its hooks into me. I'll talk more about this when it comes to the characters. Coming up is the spoiler section. Here's a timecode on screen if you want to skip plot spoilers and head right to the character section. We're going to be talking big picture there, so you're safe if you don't want any specific details. Just waiting a bit longer for the stragglers to skip ahead. Alright, let's get into it. I can't believe this game barely gives you anything on Shino. For those who haven't played the game but are still watching this section for whatever reason, Shino is a character you're told was really close to the main character, Haseo. The big bad Tri-Edge kills her in-game and sends Shino's actual human self into a coma. Haseo vows revenge on Tri-Edge, and that's the driving force throughout the game. Only you feel absolutely no connection to Shino. The game does nothing to build her up as a lovable companion, so you'll feel devastated when she's taken away. That's like character writing 101. You endear the player to a character so you'll feel terrible when they die. They didn't even go to the effort to show her off. You're just told that her and Haseo were really close. You can see that he cared for her, but you, the player, don't. And I don't think his passion is enough to give me passion. Sorry, Haseo. I don't know what to make of the Avatar stuff. The fact that there's this being hidden within certain characters that can be brought out, it's weird. Like, it makes sense for a world built around that. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I buy stands because it's just a part of that world. But the world, what the game within a game is called, is just a video game. Did the in-world developers program these avatars into the game? It's a weird thing to conceptualize. Yeah, maybe it's a bit nitpicky, but it's something I couldn't really keep out of my mind. This game really does end like the season finale to a TV show. A lot of questions are set up that will no doubt be answered in the next game. Not gonna lie, I'm a tiny bit interested in seeing where it goes. Even though the writing in this game just generally doesn't engage me, I think the questions it raises are interesting enough to where I kinda want to see how they're answered. This is a super interesting way to release a game, but honestly, I'm kinda glad we don't see stuff like this anymore. Volumes 1, 2, and 3 being released only a handful of months apart, I think I'd prefer them to be a part of one big 60-hour game rather than 3 20-hour games, but that's just me. I think that's it for spoilers. The plot didn't really engage me enough to get me super invested where I have a ton of opinions on the answers given to questions asked earlier in the game. I'm just like, oh, that's cool. Nothing mind-blowing in my eyes. The characters. Oh man, this is where RPGs shine for me. If your game has a cool party with good chemistry, I'll be willing to overlook a lot. Unfortunately, this game's party doesn't really resonate with me. They're just so tropey, my god! This whole game is tropey. It feels like if there's an archetype a character falls into, they will not do anything to stray from that. Haseo is a bit of a hard ass, but you know he'll come around eventually. This guy is always going after girls, and this girl is here to scold him for it. Atoli is completely pure of heart and absolutely devoted to pleasing Haseo. They're just so boring! I can't help but think of Final Fantasy VII when judging how good an RPG party is. That game goes above and beyond in making each character distinct. You look at each one of them and you think you might have a grasp on who they are, but so much depth is revealed once you get to know them. Barrett is one of my favorite RPG characters of all time. He just has so much going on. None of these characters have anything going on. And sure, maybe it's not fair to compare these guys to the titans that are the party from FF7, but it kinda puts things into perspective. These days, you can really curate the games you play to only be the best of the best. And if all you play is the best of the best, you forget what it's like to see something average. Not terrible, don't get me wrong, these characters aren't offensively awful. They do have their endearing moments. But they aren't really mind-blowingly great either. They're just kinda there. Haseo and Atoli's relationship really gets to me though. Haseo is the character you play as, and he has a very hard exterior. He rejects help from other people and is only out for himself a lot of the time. He's admittedly kind of an asshole. And Atoli is the complete opposite. For some reason, she is completely obsessed with Haseo. She follows him around despite him being awful towards her, and she almost never stands up for herself. She does a few times, to be fair, but she almost always comes back. It feels like she has no standing outside of Haseo. Almost every facet of her character is centered around being nice to and helping him. It just feels weird. Give her a bit of a backbone. And sure, this is volume 1 of 3, so maybe that develops later on, but as it is in this game, she doesn't feel like a character herself. She feels like an accessory to Haseo. The other characters don't really get me as worked up. Syllabus and Gaspard are kinda fun. They play the game almost exclusively to help out new people, so they're kinda hopeful people to be around. They're the only other characters I feel anything about. The other stuff. This is a section where we talk about anything that doesn't fit into the other sections. And I'd like to use this time to talk about how .hackgu handles the MMO premise. That's the one thing I knew about this game going into it, that it took place inside an MMO, and how it recreated some things MMOs are known for. I distinctly remember hearing about how there were NPCs walking around town that were meant to be real players. I thought that was a cool idea. It's what put the game on my radar. Once I actually got into the game, it was cool to see in what other ways they ran with that. Occasionally, when talking to players, you'll see a little smiley face in the subtitles. That reminds you that these are people typing messages into a text chat. It does kinda muddy the waters a bit when characters start to emote and act out scenes, because characters don't really move like this in games during player-to-player conversation. It'd look more like the Minecraft thing with people hopping around and crouching. I still do like the smiley faces though. Some of the conversations you have with NPCs are funny. They'll talk about how they've been lagging lately or how they liked the previous version of the game better. That's totally something you'd see in an actual MMO. And oh my god, the forums? They made actual fictional forums for this game that you can read through. There's a ton of different threads with a bunch of different replies from a bunch of different people. It's so charming reading through all these and getting a sense of the personality of all these people. I can't really think of a game that's done anything like this. It's genuinely novel. Even if the gameplay isn't really like an MMO, they did a lot to make everything surrounding the gameplay feel very MMO-esque. I appreciate that. It's what helps this game stand out from the crowd of other JRPGs at the time. And with that, we'll talk about the ranking. Though real quick, I kinda want to talk about the volume thing one more time. This is volume 1 of 3 that released on the PS2 back in the day, and I haven't played the other two. I don't know what happens in those. I'm just ranking this as an entry point to the series. If this is season 1 of a TV show, like I alluded to earlier, think of this as a review of season 1. Maybe season 2 and 3 gets better, I don't know. I can only go off what's in this one. Because, to be honest, I'm not super interested in checking the others out. This game didn't really grab me. Sure, I'm a little interested in seeing what goes on in the plot later on. I think they set up a few interesting plot threads. But I don't know, I'm not dying to see what happens. Sometimes you watch a show and hit the season finale, and you just gotta keep watching immediately. Like, play the premiere of the next season right after the finale of the last. It's so easy to do that on streamers when the next episode is right there to play afterwards. I could have done that with this game. Volume 2 is on the title screen right next to Volume 1. But I didn't want to, for whatever reason. If I don't like an RPG, I think it almost always comes down to the characters. I wasn't super invested in the characters in this game, and I'm not super curious to see what happens to them next. I'm willing to forgive a lot if the characters are good in the game. If they aren't good though, it's really hard for me to get invested. Well, there's only one other game we've talked about in the series so far, Xenoblade Chronicles. I don't think it'll surprise anyone that I'm placing .hackgu Volume 1 below it. This game did do a few things that I liked, but Xenoblade Chronicles was so much more impactful. It's almost unfair to even compare these two, but as we add more games, the bigger picture will start to come together. We'll eventually find out what is the best RPG ever. To me. Thanks for watching.